Virgo. Just stop. Whatever you were doing before you pressed play, set it down. Because what this reflection is about to walk through is not something to half listen to in the background. It is the kind of thing that tends to land differently when a person is actually present for it, when they are willing to sit with it rather than past it. Because if there is someone in your life right now, someone you once felt deeply connected to, someone who mattered in ways that are difficult to fully articulate, and that connection has been quietly fraying at the edges, then something in you already knows that what is happening between you and that person is more complicated than simply drifting apart, and that complexity deserves more than a distracted glance. Disconnection rarely announces itself. That is the first thing worth understanding about what you may be experiencing right now. It does not arrive as a single dramatic moment, a door slamming, a final conversation, a clear and definitive ending that both people recognize at the same time. That version of endings exists, but it is far less common than the other kind. The other kind is slower, quieter, almost polite in the way it moves. It is the conversation that used to flow for hours and now runs dry after 20 minutes. It is the silence between two people that used to feel comfortable, the kind of silence that only people who truly know each other can share without discomfort, slowly becoming something different, something with edges, something that both people notice but neither fully names. It is the moment when you realize you have stopped sharing the small things, the ordinary, unremarkable details of your day that you used to offer freely without thinking, because sharing them with this person felt as natural as breathing. And now those details stay with you, unshared, accumulating quietly in the space where closeness used to live. This is what disconnection looks like in its early stages. Not a rupture, a slow, almost imperceptible loosening of the threads that once held two people in genuine proximity to each other. But here is what makes this particular reflection different from the ones that simply observe the obvious. Because anyone can notice that a connection is fading. The more interesting question, the one that most people are either afraid to ask or simply don't know how to ask, is why. Not the surface reasons, not the explanations that are easy to reach for the busy schedules, the changing circumstances, the way life has a tendency to pull people in different directions without asking their permission first. Those things are real, but they are rarely the whole story. Beneath the practical explanations for why two people begin to lose their closeness, there is almost always something more layered. Something that has less to do with logistics and more to do with the invisible architecture of the connection itself, the unspoken expectations, the unresolved tensions, the needs that were never quite communicated clearly enough to be met. And perhaps most significantly, the ways in which both people have been changing separately, sometimes without fully realizing it themselves, growing in directions that feel exciting and necessary from the inside, but that from the outside can look like withdrawal, like distance, like a person becoming gradually less legible to someone who thought they knew them completely. This is one of the quietest and most under-acknowledged causes of disconnection between people who genuinely love each other. Not indifference, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of growth, individual, asymmetric, sometimes disorienting growth that neither person has yet found the language to bridge. Let's sit with that word for a moment. Love. Because the situation this reflection is speaking to is not the simple one, the one where feeling has faded and both people have moved on, and the distance between them is merely the natural result of two lives heading in different directions. That situation exists, and it has its own quiet dignity. This reflection is for the more complicated version, the one where the love is still present unmistakably, sometimes inconveniently present, even as the connection continues to thin, even as the conversations grow shorter and the silences grow longer, and the easy intimacy that once characterized the relationship becomes something that both people seem to be reaching for without quite managing to grasp. That particular combination, love without connection, feeling without closeness, is one of the most disorienting experiences a person can move through, because it defies the logic that most people apply to relationships. The logic that says if the love is real, the connection should follow naturally. That presence and feeling are the same thing. That caring deeply about someone is sufficient to keep them close. But anyone who has experienced this knows that it is not sufficient, that love, however genuine, does not automatically generate the conditions for closeness. That closeness is its own separate thing, something that requires tending, something that can erode even in the presence of deep feeling if the right conditions are not maintained. And sometimes, without either person intending it, those conditions quietly disappear. Now, here is the part that requires a particular kind of honesty. When a connection begins to unravel between two people who love each other, there is a tendency, almost universal in its reach, to look outward for the cause, to identify the external pressures, the circumstances, the other people or obligations that seem to be pulling the connection apart. And those external factors are real. They should not be dismissed. But the most significant forces shaping a disconnection are almost never entirely external. They live quietly and persistently in the interior landscape of each person involved, in the fears that have never been spoken aloud, in the needs that have been hinted at but never clearly expressed, in the wounds, old ones, sometimes that predate this relationship entirely, that have quietly shaped the way each person shows up or fails to show up in moments that required more than they knew how to give. Whew. Some people, when they begin to feel a connection slipping, respond by pulling back further. It is a counterintuitive response, but a deeply human one. The logic beneath it, rarely examined, goes something like this. If I withdraw before I am fully lost, I protect myself from the full weight of the loss. If I create the distance rather than simply experiencing it, I retain some sense of agency over something that otherwise feels completely beyond my control. The problem, of course, is that this response accelerates precisely what it is trying to protect against. The withdrawal signals to the other person that the connection is already gone or going. And that person, carrying their own fears, their own interpretations, their own instinct for self-protection, begins to respond in kind. And the distance compounds itself, fed by both people's attempts to manage a pain that neither has yet been willing to name directly. This is how two people who love each other can end up standing on opposite sides of a silence neither of them chose and neither of them fully understands. Here is what very few people consider when they are in the middle of this kind of slow unraveling. The connection that is fraying right now, the one between you and the person who has been drifting or who you have been drifting from it, has a memory, not a metaphorical one, a real, lived, accumulated memory of every moment of genuine closeness, of every conversation that went somewhere true, of every instance of being known and being held in the specific, irreplaceable way that only this particular person has ever held you. That memory does not disappear when the connection thins. It goes quiet sometimes. It recedes beneath the noise of difficulty and distance and all the things that have gone unsaid. But it remains. And it remains in both people simultaneously, which means that the possibility of reconnection, of finding the thread again, of rebuilding the conditions for closeness, is not something that requires creating something new from nothing. It requires instead a different kind of courage. The courage to acknowledge what has been lost without pretending it doesn't matter. The courage to reach towards someone even when reaching feels uncertain, even when the outcome cannot be guaranteed, even when the last several attempts at closeness seem to land in empty air. And perhaps most importantly, the courage to be honest, not brutal, not careless, but genuinely, vulnerably honest about what this connection means, about what has been missing, about what both people might need in order to find their way back to something real. That conversation, the honest one, the one that has been circling the edges of this situation without quite landing, may be closer to necessary than either person has yet been willing to admit. Before this reflection closes, there is one more thing worth sitting with: disconnection. Even when it is painful, even when it feels like losing something irreplaceable is not always the final word on a connection. Sometimes it is a passage, a difficult, disorienting, necessary passage through which two people move separately before finding their way back to each other with a clarity and an intentionality that the original connection, for all its beauty, may never have possessed. The love you carry for someone you are disconnecting from right now, whatever form that love takes, whatever history it is rooted in, that love is information. It is telling you something about what matters to you, about what you are not yet ready to release, about what part of yourself is still reaching, even when the rest of you has grown uncertain or exhausted or quietly afraid. Listen to it. Not to be controlled by it, not to bypass the very real questions about whether and how this connection can be restored, but to understand what it is pointing toward in yourself, in what you need, in the kind of closeness you are ultimately seeking. Because the most important relationships in a person's life rarely follow a straight line. They bend, they contract, they go through periods of extraordinary closeness and periods of bewildering distance. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the distance is not the ending. It is the space in which both people quietly become ready for something truer than what they had before. Whatever is happening between you and the person you are thinking of right now, whatever the distance looks like, however long it has been building, the fact that you are still thinking of them, still carrying them, still willing to sit with the weight of this reflection rather than look away, that is not nothing. That may, in fact, be everything.